The Dust Devil Gulch station was cloaked in yellow dust as the train screeched to a halt. Lian and Mai, two identical young Chinese women, stepped onto the platform, clutching a single old wooden chest between them. In their hearts, a fragile hope still flickered. That after this long journey, a home and a husband would be waiting. But the man who came to meet them, Franklin Pierce, a young shopkeeper, showed no warmth at all. He glanced from one identical face to the other, his eyes narrowing. He saw their delicate frames, porcelain skin, and long, braided black hair, their figures hidden beneath simple silk tunics. Franklin let out a bitter laugh, his voice cutting through the crowd. "I sent for a wife, not a pair of oriental dolls. What am I supposed to do with two?" His words tore through their shared dream like a knife. Townsfolk murmured among themselves. Some laughed out loud. And a child pointed and shouted, "Look, two of them!" Lian and Mai stood frozen, their hands trembling as they clenched the handle of their chest. Tears welled in their almond-shaped eyes, but they forced themselves to lift their chins, even though their hearts were breaking. Franklin turned his back and walked away, leaving the twins slumped on the wooden bench at the station. Surrounded by mocking laughter and contemptuous stares, they curled into each other, abandoned in a world that had already cast them out. Only the desert wind howled through the dust, swirling around the two Chinese women left behind, clutching their chest in silence, with nothing left but humiliation. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Dust Devil Gulch station as the sound of mocking laughter still lingered in the air. Lian and Mai sat in silence, their shoulders trembling now and then. The old chest rested by their feet, and suddenly the entire world seemed to shrink into a dusty corner of the wooden platform. Amid the noisy crowd, one man stood quietly watching. Arthur Shaw, a middle-aged rancher, wore a weathered leather coat, his grey eyes cold and his face worn with the marks of a hard life. He had lost his wife many years ago and had lived alone ever since on a patch of barren land west of town. Arthur was not one to meddle in others' affairs, but something about the sight of the abandoned Chinese women, their proud eyes trying to mask their shame, kept him from walking away. Without saying much, Arthur stepped forward. The crowd fell silent at once. Everyone recognized the rancher who kept to himself, yet was respected for his quiet resolve and the steady hand that was never far from his gun. He stopped in front of Lian and Mai. They looked up, their tear-filled black eyes sharp with suspicion, like cornered animals ready to strike. Arthur offered no comfort, asked no questions. His voice was raspy and low. Just 3 words. "Come with me." The twins froze for a moment. A storm of questions surged through their minds. Was this man trying to take advantage of them? Was it just another trap? But when they met Arthur's gaze, all they saw was the stillness of stone. No mockery, no pity. He bent down, lifted their heavy chest with one hand, then turned and walked away. Slow but certain. After a few seconds of silent communication between them, the sisters rose and followed. They had nowhere else to go. The road out of town was choked with dust, and the wind lashed sand across their faces. Arthur rode his horse while Lian and Mai walked beside him. Their thin-soled shoes were quickly torn, their feet bloodied, but their posture remained unyielding. None of them said a word. There was only the creak of the saddle and the soft footsteps of 2 women too foreign for the world around them, their eyes burning with a silent longing for a place to belong. By the time darkness fell, they reached a small ranch house nestled deep in the open prairie. The wooden cabin was humble, its fence leaning, the barn quiet. Arthur opened the door and gestured. "There is room for you in here. If you want to leave, do it in the morning. But if you stay, live like human beings." The sisters paused at the threshold. Inside them, doubt and hope collided fiercely. That night, when they stepped into the first room in years that had a roof of their own, they knew their life had just taken a different turn. On their first morning at the ranch, Lian and Mai woke to the sound of roosters crowing mixed with the howling wind across the prairie. Pale light filtered through the cracks in the door, revealing the shared, simple room. The night before, they had slept on a hard wooden bed beneath a patchwork blanket that was worn but clean, carrying the scent of sunlight. For the first time in so long, their sleep had not been haunted by cold or fear. In the kitchen, Arthur had been up for hours. He tended the fire, smoke curling through the small window frame. Without a word of greeting, he pushed 2 simple bowls of bean soup toward them, then returned to slicing cured meat. The sisters sat down and ate quietly, their black eyes stealing glances at this solitary man. He was weathered and silent, but in all his movements, there was not a trace of contempt. The day passed slowly. Arthur led the horse out to the field while Lian and Mai, without being asked, began to clean. One picked up a broom and began sweeping the floor, while the other straightened the chairs and began mending a tear in the curtain by the window with impossibly fine stitches. Their delicate hands were not made for rough labor, but every motion was filled with determination, a quiet plea to prove they were not useless. By afternoon, Arthur returned with a bundle of firewood. The sisters rushed outside to help. He started to wave them off, but when he caught the resolve in their eyes, he silently set the bundle down. Together, they managed to carry it inside without a word, only the sound of labored breaths mingling with the wind sweeping through the grasslands. Night fell, and they sat across from each other at the dinner table. The dim oil lamp cast a golden light on Arthur's sun-worn face and the soft lines of the twins' cheekbones. The silence was heavy, stretching between them. At last, it was Lian who broke it. "Why did you bring us here?" "Out of pity." Arthur looked up, his steel-grey eyes catching the glow in the dark. His voice was calm. "No. I just did not want to watch them treat you that way." The answer stunned them. After so many years of being seen as a burden, no one had ever spoken to them as if they were simply human beings. That night, as they lay down, a strange sense of hope welled up inside them. They thought of a dream long buried, a home. A man strong enough to stand beside them. A life that might one day hold happiness. Things that had once felt impossibly distant now flickered like a faint light within this old wooden house. Outside, the wind howled long into the night. But within the sisters' hearts, for the first time, there was a fragile and precious sliver of peace. Rumor spread fast in Dust Devil Gulch. The identical Chinese women had been taken in by Arthur Shaw at his ranch. Some scoffed, others whispered, claiming the lonely old rancher had lost his mind. But in the shadowy corner of the saloon, Franklin Pierce, the man who had sent for one wife and received 2, ground his teeth. Publicly humiliated in front of the entire town, he could not stand the thought of Lian and Mai, his brides on paper, finding peace in someone else's home. A week later, Franklin went looking for a thug named Roscoe Malone, a brute with hands like mallets and a face carved in scars. Roscoe was infamous in the region. Wherever he went, bloodshed followed. Franklin knew better than to face Arthur on his own, so he hid behind the shadow of violence. That afternoon, Arthur and the sisters came into town to buy flour, nails, and a few seed packets. The air on Main Street tightened like a drawn bowstring the moment they appeared. Conversations died mid-sentence, fingers pointed. Lian and Mai walked beside Arthur, their presence a stark contrast to the dusty town. Their cold black eyes remained steady, but their hands clutched each other's a little too tightly. Suddenly, Roscoe stepped into their path. His voice grated like gravel. "These women belong to my boss. Hand them over and walk away." Arthur stopped, gently setting the sack of seeds on the ground. His grey eyes scanned Roscoe before settling on Franklin, lurking just behind the hired gun. His voice was calm, but it rang clear through the silent street. "They don't belong to anyone, and they have chosen to be with me." The crowd held its breath. For a second, silence froze everything. Then Roscoe sneered, one massive hand resting on the grip of the pistol hanging at his side. Lian and Mai stood behind Arthur, their hearts pounding in unison. But in their eyes sparked something new. For the first time, a man was standing in front of them, not to shame them, but to shield them. The air was thick with imagined gunpowder. The slightest twitch could set it all off. Arthur shifted half a step forward, his right hand hovering near the Colt at his hip. In the fierce red light of the setting sun, his lean frame seemed forged from steel, as if the whole prairie had gone still with him. At last, it was Franklin who blinked. Fear won out. He pulled Roscoe back and muttered, "Not here." Not now. They retreated, but Franklin's eyes burned with hatred. As Arthur, Leanne, and Mai left the town behind, the whispers resumed. Some nodded in respect. Others shook their heads in scorn. But inside the sisters, only one thing echoed. He stood up for us, in front of everyone. That night, back at the ranch, Mai sat by the fire and spoke for the first time of the future. Her voice did not tremble. It was steady and deep, like the beat of a drum. If you will have us, we will stay. We are not going anywhere. After the tense afternoon in Dust Devil Gulch, Arthur's ranch became a rare haven of peace. Leanne and Mai tied their hair back, their nimble hands gradually growing familiar with mending fences, tending a small garden, and even helping to herd the cattle. Arthur was a man of few words, but every morning, when he saw the two women walking steadily beside him, the emptiness that had long gnawed at his soul seemed a little lighter. One time, Arthur noticed Mai's wrist was still swollen from a fall. Quietly, he soaked medicinal herbs and gently applied them to the bruise. Mai winced but did not push him away. Her deep black eyes met his, not just with caution now but with something else, gratitude. That night by the fire, Leanne spoke slowly in halting English. In our village, we were two mouths to feed. A burden. Always the ones they scorned, the ones they would send away. But here, we feel warmth. Arthur did not answer. He simply added another log to the stove, letting the glow flicker across his sun-worn, wrinkled face. Then he gave a small nod. To him, home had ceased to exist the day fever took his wife and child. But now, maybe he did not want to live in that house alone anymore. Meanwhile, over in the Dust Devil Gulch saloon, Franklin Pierce drowned his frustration in whiskey. The shame of that day still cut like a blade. He ranted to Roscoe Malone, his voice slurring with drink. He stole those women from me right in front of the whole damn town. If I don't take them back, what kind of man am I? Roscoe sneered, flashing a broken-toothed grin. Then let's wipe him out. One old rancher and a couple of undersized women. Me and a couple of the boys can handle that. The plan took shape right there at the bar. One night, while Arthur was out checking the pasture, Roscoe and his men would ambush him and force Leanne and Mai to return as Franklin's property. Back at the ranch, Arthur and the sisters remained unaware of the storm brewing. They spent their quiet days building a new roof for the grain shed. When Arthur handed Leanne a hammer, Mai let out a soft laugh, a sound so unfamiliar it startled even her. Laughter had never been part of a life shaped by rejection. At night, Arthur sat on the porch smoking his pipe, while Leanne and Mai sat nearby, mending clothes, their figures silent in the lamplight. In that silence, something burned low and steady, a fragile trust slowly kindling into warmth. But down at the far end of the valley, Roscoe's wagon wheels had begun to turn, carrying whiskey, gunpowder, and hatred. Darkness no longer meant the quiet of night. It now held the promise of a storm drawing near. A crescent moon hung low in the Arizona sky, casting a silver glow across the silent prairie. Wind whistled through the wooden fence, soft as a whisper in the dark. Arthur stood on the porch, his Winchester resting against the door frame. The old dog let out a low, growling bark, its hackles raised. Arthur knew something was coming. Inside, Leanne fed another log into the stove. Smoke curled into the air as firelight danced across their faces. Her hand froze. Mai had heard the dog too. Their black eyes gleamed with alertness, the instincts of survivors who had long learned to be wary. Then came the heavy thud beyond the fence line, the unmistakable sound of hooves pounding dry earth. Then more. Then many. Arthur tightened his grip on the rifle. His voice was low and hard. They are here. Before he could say more, the window shattered with a crash. A bullet slammed into the ceiling beam. Leanne lunged to douse the main lamp, plunging the room into shadow, while Mai grabbed the heavy iron skillet from the stove. Shadows moved across the yard. Roscoe Malone and 3 others, guns glinting under the moonlight. Roscoe roared, his voice wild and feral. "Hand the women over, or all of you die tonight." Arthur answered with a thunderous gunshot, the bullet tearing up dirt right at Roscoe's feet. Gunfire exploded in reply. Windows shattered, firelight catching shards of glass flying through the air. The sisters did not flinch. From the darkness, Mai hurled the heavy skillet. It caught one man square in the chest, sending him staggering back with a grunt. Arthur covered her, cold-eyed and precise, moving like a man who had fought in wars long past. Roscoe charged forward, an axe in hand. He swung it down hard on the door, splintering the wood. Steel flashed in the firelight. Arthur pulled the sisters back and shoved a heavy table against the door. "They are not coming through this threshold," Arthur said, his voice like stone. Leanne and Mai looked at him, their eyes fierce and warm at once. For the first time in their lives, they were not fighting alone. Outside, Roscoe and his men howled, hurling torches onto the thatched roof. Flames burst into the night, lighting their snarling faces. But inside the small house, a weathered rancher and two determined women stood side by side, weapons ready, hearts beating as one. That night, the wind carried smoke, gunfire echoed with battle cries, and above it all, the fire-forged will to survive, and a new kind of faith being born from blood and flame. Flames roared as the thatched roof was devoured, ashes swirling into the night wind. Cattle in the barn wailed in panic, terrified by the gunfire and the crimson blaze. Arthur backed into a corner, reloading his Winchester, eyes locked through the narrow crack of the door. Outside, Roscoe Malone was circling around with the rest of his men, aiming to break into the barn and burn everything to the ground. "They are trying to burn the whole damn place," Arthur muttered, his voice gravelly. Leanne and Mai stood beside him, sweat and soot streaking their faces. They knew they could not win a prolonged gunfight. They exchanged a look, a plan forming between them without a single word. Leanne grabbed the carbine, while Mai picked up a long, sharp kitchen knife. "I will draw them to the side," Leanne whispered. Arthur shook his head, but before he could stop her, Leanne had burst through the side door like a gust of wind. It swung wide open, and her slim figure appeared in the firelight, stopping the men in their tracks. Roscoe growled, dropping his axe and drawing a pistol, but Leanne was already moving, firing the carbine from her hip, forcing them to take cover. It was the diversion Mai needed. She slipped out the back, a silent shadow in the chaos, circling around behind the wagon where the other men were hiding. While Roscoe was focused on Leanne, Mai struck. She lunged from the darkness, the knife flashing. One man screamed and dropped his rifle, clutching a bleeding arm. The other turned in shock, but Mai was a whirlwind, using her small size to her advantage, ducking under his clumsy swing and driving the heel of her boot into his knee. He collapsed with a cry. On the dry earth, Roscoe finally cornered Leanne, his massive frame blocking her escape. He was strong, but she was fast and smart. She ducked and weaved, using the terrain to her advantage, even as he swung his pistol like a club. Blood trickled from a gash on her arm, but she roared, a sound of someone who would never submit. Roscoe bellowed and hurled her off with all his strength. They tumbled down a small slope, kicking up dirt and sparks. He grabbed her hair, trying to pin her down, but just as he raised his hand to strike, Mai appeared behind him, swinging a heavy piece of firewood with all her might. The wood connected with the back of Roscoe's head with a sickening thud. He gasped, reeling, and collapsed to the ground. Leanne rose, her powerful spirit shining from her exhausted body, her black eyes blazing with fury. She kicked the pistol away from his hand. "You will never lay a hand on us again," she growled through clenched teeth. When Arthur arrived, smoke still rising from his Winchester, he saw them, Leanne and Mai, standing together over their attacker in the flickering fire and ash, breathing heavily, but their gazes unwavering. Arthur placed a steady hand on each of their shoulders. His voice was firm and low. "That is enough. Tonight, we are still alive. That is victory." Ash floated into the air like a curtain falling on a battle written in flame and fury. The Dust Devil Gulch Valley lay in quiet stillness after days of storm and fire. Franklin Pierce vanished from the land, unable to show his face again after such a humiliating defeat. The thug Roscoe, bloodied and broken, also fled, leaving behind only ash, gunpowder, and the memory of a night that lit the sky red. The ghosts that once haunted Arthur, Leanne, and Mai had finally faded away. The ranch, though scorched at the roof and scarred by bullet holes, still stood tall, and within that damage, a new home was being built. The sisters cleared the ashes, their combined strength and tireless work allowing them to lift beams Arthur could not manage alone. He chopped wood, they raised the fence. They worked not just as partners, but as companions. There was no need for many words, just shared glances and movements that fit like clockwork. That evening, as the cattle returned slowly from pasture, Leanne sat on the porch. On her face, her black eyes held a strange, peaceful light. She placed one hand on her belly and whispered to her sister, "I never thought I would live to call any place home." Arthur stood beside them, silent for a long time, then wrapped an arm around Leanne's shoulders, his other hand resting gently on Mai's. It was not a gesture of impulse, it was a life's decision. In the red light of sunset washing over the fields, he was no longer a lonely rancher, and they were no longer castaways. They were three broken souls who had found each other, mended by choice. The townsfolk still gossiped. They still whispered their cruel names, but Arthur paid them no mind. He walked with both women through the market, his quiet dignity a shield for them. The way he stood beside them quieted every mocking laugh, and soon the town no longer saw the strange foreign women. They saw a strong, unconventional family. A month later, the doctor from Prescott came to check on their wounds and smiled as he delivered the news to Arthur. Leanne was pregnant. The words lit a fire of joy inside the small wooden house. Arthur sat quietly on the steps for a long while, eyes on the open fields, pipe smoke curling in the air. The pain of losing his wife and child slowly faded, replaced now by the image of a child yet to be born into this new, strange, and wonderful family. On the final night of summer, beneath the wooden porch, Leanne rested her head on Arthur's shoulder while Mai sat beside her, a hand resting on her sister's growing belly. Together, they watched the starlit sky in silence. Out there on the prairie, they were no longer lone survivors. They were a family. And in the harsh land of the West, no one chooses where they are born, but they can choose who they live with. A home, even built from charred timber, stands stronger than any fortress when it is held together by love and trust. That is family, the greatest treasure a person can have.